I paid for the entire wedding, from the flowers to the venue, the photographer to the open bar, every detail, every invoice, every dream they had scribbled on mood boards, I made real. Not because I had to, but because I wanted him to feel celebrated. My son, my only child. I raised him alone after his father walked out, juggled 2 jobs so he could have piano lessons, decent shoes, birthday parties that made him feel seen. And when he got engaged, I told him, don't worry about the costume. Got it. I dipped into my savings, canceled a long-awaited trip, even sold a small heirloom bracelet my mother left me. I told myself it was worth it to see him happy. And on the big day, everything looked perfect. Guests complimented the flowers. The band played his favorite song. He stood there glowing next to his bride, both of them wrapped in a future I helped build. But then came the speeches. He took the mic, smiled, and began to thank people. To my friends, my mentors, and especially my real family, who stood by me and made today possible. Real family, I blinked. Surely he meant something else. But then he looked toward his in-laws, raised his glass, and the crowd applauded. I waited for my name. For a glance, for a nod, but nothing came. I stood there, invisible, in the very room I had paid for. My hands trembled as I held the program. A stranger beside me whispered, "Are you his aunt?" I smiled weakly. "Something like that," I said. And in that moment, surrounded by candles and celebration, I felt something inside me snap so quietly, even I almost missed it. I stayed through the dinner, though I couldn't taste a single bite. The steak went cold on my plate, the wine warm in my glass. People were laughing, clinking glasses, dancing to songs I once played in our kitchen. While he did homework at the table, I watched him twirl his new wife on the dance floor, her dress sparkling under the chandeliers I paid to hang. No one noticed me tucked away at the corner table near the exit. No one approached. I wasn't wearing anything flashy, just a navy blue dress I'd altered myself, trying to save on one last expense. My shoes pinched, my back ached, but none of it hurt as much as watching him call someone else family while I sat in the shadows. His in-laws beamed like royalty. His father, the man who hadn't paid a single cent, who hadn't shown up for birthdays or parent-teacher meetings, stood near the head table, shaking hands like he'd built this boy from love. And me. I had become scenery, wallpaper, an extra in the background of a life I sacrificed everything to make possible. I went to the bathroom just to breathe, just to not cry where anyone could see. The mirror under the golden lights was cruel. I looked tired, older than I remembered. My makeup had smudged under my eyes. I wiped it gently, trying to pull myself together. I whispered, "You're okay. Just get through this night." But I wasn't okay. I was broken in a way that felt quiet and permanent. Like a seam inside me had come undone. And worst of all, I didn't want to stay, but I also didn't know how to leave without someone finally asking, who was she, anyway? When the cake was served, I slipped out. No one noticed. No heads turned. I left behind the candlelit hall, the clinking glasses, the laughter that no longer included me. Outside, the air was cooler than I expected. I walked slowly to my car, not the one I used to drive, the one I sold a year ago to help cover the deposit for the venue. I was driving an old used sedan now, something modest that rattled a little when it turned. I sat in the driver's seat and stared at the steering wheel, my hands still trembling slightly. I didn't cry. There weren't any tears left, just a strange quiet inside my chest. That kind of pain, the kind where you realize your role in someone's life doesn't scream, it just sinks. I remembered how he used to fall asleep on my lap, how he once told me I was his whole world. And now, that same boy had raised a glass in front of 200 people and thanked everyone but me. Even the photographer didn't capture a single photo of us together. I knew I checked the online album 2 weeks later. Not a single shot, as if I'd never been there, as if I were a rumor or a ghost. I drove home with the radio off, headlights slicing through the darkness, trying to understand when exactly I became disposable. I had paid for the whole wedding, but apparently that bought me a seat in the shadows. And the worst part was, I hadn't done it for gratitude. I did it out of love. But that night taught me something brutal. Love without acknowledgement becomes erosion. And I had been quietly eroding for years, pretending it was enough to simply be nearby. The day after the wedding, my phone didn't ring, no message, no thank you. No, did you get home safe? Just silence. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, staring at the small pile of receipts and notes I had saved in a folder, lists of vendors, seating charts, a handwritten schedule with his name scribbled in the margins. I had kept everything, thinking maybe one day he'd want to look back and see how much care went into it. Now it felt absurd. I slid the folder into a drawer I rarely opened. That morning I wandered the house like someone recovering from surgery. Not in pain, exactly, just hollow. I reheated leftovers I didn't want, folded laundry I didn't remember washing. The wedding had cost me more than money, it had cost me my sense of place. And when Marta, my neighbor, knocked on the door and asked how it went, I smiled and lied. Beautiful, I said. He looked so happy. I didn't mention the speech. I didn't mention the seat near the kitchen or the way my name was never spoken, because saying it out loud would make it real, and I wasn't ready for that yet. I told myself maybe he was overwhelmed. Maybe he meant to call. Maybe it was just a slip of the tongue. Real family was probably just a phrase. Nothing more, but my body knew better. My stomach stayed tight. My chest felt heavy. I hadn't eaten properly in 2 days, and I kept hearing his voice in that microphone. So clear, so certain. That's what cut the deepest. He wasn't confused. He wasn't unsure. He had simply decided publicly, proudly that I wasn't part of what he valued. And no silence could undo the echo of that moment. I told myself he would call that weekend, maybe even stop by. I imagined him walking in with leftover cake, laughing sheepishly, saying, "Sorry, I forgot to mention you, Mom, it was all a blur." I practiced my smile in the mirror, the one that forgives too quickly. But Sunday passed. Then Monday, nothing. I started checking his social media more than I wanted to admit. The photos kept coming. Honeymoon snapshots, pictures of champagne glasses, sunsets, matching robes at some expensive resort I didn't know he could afford. His in-laws commented under every post, "So proud of you both. What a perfect couple. You're family now." Family. That word again. It followed me around like a mosquito in a quiet room. Small, constant, inescapable. I reread the caption under one post where he thanked everyone who made this day possible. Still no mention of me. I stared at it for so long my eyes began to blur. I told myself I was overreacting, that he didn't mean harm. That maybe in his mind I was so obvious, so foundational, he didn't feel the need to say it out loud. But the truth is, people always thank the things they're truly grateful for. Loudly, publicly, with pride. I had been erased, not forgotten. There's a difference. One is neglect, the other is choice. I began to understand that what hurt most wasn't the absence of recognition, but the realization that I had raised someone capable of performing love in private and abandoning it in public. And still, a part of me hoped. That's the sickness of certain kinds of motherhood, you keep setting the table, long after everyone's stopped coming home. I left the porch light on that night, and the next, until even the light began to feel ashamed of waiting. Eventually, I stopped checking my phone as often. Not because I no longer cared, but because I was tired of the sting that came with silence. It began to feel like a ritual of self-harm, opening the inbox, scrolling, finding nothing, and still hoping. I started talking less about the wedding when friends asked. I shrank the story into 2 sentences. It was beautiful. He's happy. That was easier than unpacking the truth. People don't know what to say when a child breaks your heart. It's not like divorce or death. There's no script, no casserole dropped off at your door. Just polite nods and quick changes of subject. So I stopped speaking. Not out of pride, out of preservation. I went back to work, folded laundry, fed the cat, sat on the porch with coffee I couldn't finish. One afternoon, I passed by the hallway, mirror, and paused. The woman staring back at me looked hollow, like someone who had been waiting at a train station long after the last departure. I placed my hand on the glass and whispered, "This can't be all there is." And that was the first time I realized I was grieving. Not a death. Not even the loss of my son exactly, but the death of an illusion. The idea that sacrifice always leads to closeness, that giving would guarantee gratitude, that if you love hard enough, you'll always be loved back. I began to understand that I had poured everything into someone who had no intention of pouring anything back. And as cruel as that felt, it was also freeing, because if I was no longer expected, I was finally allowed to ask a dangerous, beautiful question. What would my life look like if I chose me? I didn't transform overnight. There was no thunderclap, no grand declaration, just small, quiet shifts. I began with the guest room, the one I had once planned to turn into a nursery for future grandchildren. I cleared it out, donated a reading lamp, a chair that felt like it belonged only to me. I told myself it was just a home project, something to keep me busy, but it was more than that. It was the beginning of reclaiming space in my own life. One afternoon, I walked into a bookstore I hadn't visited in years and found a novel I used to love. Something I read before motherhood rewrote my identity, and for a few minutes I wasn't a mother left behind. I was just a woman, whole and breathing, remembering who she used to be. I began cooking meals that I liked, playing music from my youth, singing aloud in the kitchen without worrying if someone might roll their eyes. I even started writing again, just small journal entries, but honest ones, raw ones, Pages where I wasn't invisible. Grief still lived. In me, yes, but so did something else possibility. I wasn't healed. Not yet. But I was done waiting for validation from someone who saw my love as a utility. And slowly, painfully, I was beginning to understand that my worth didn't disappear just because someone failed to see it. I had simply stopped looking in the mirror long enough to forget it was still there. I started saying yes to things I used to decline out of guilt. Marta invited me to a local art exhibit, and I went not as someone's mother, not as someone expected to rush home and be available, but just as myself. We walked through the gallery slowly, pausing at paintings that made us feel something. One of them stopped me cold, a portrait of a woman sitting. Later, over wine, Marta told me she was glad to see me smiling again, and I realized I was too. One that came from a place inside me I thought had closed. That night, I came home and stood in the middle of my living room. No television on, no distractions, just me, and the hum of a house I had once filled for others. And for the first time, I didn't feel lonely. I felt mine, my space, my silence, my rhythm. I wrote 3 full pages in my journal, and every word felt like a brick being laid in the foundation of someone new. Not someone bitter, not someone hardened, just someone rebuilding. But I knew this. I would no longer audition for love in rooms I paid to build. If someone couldn't see me without being reminded, then they never saw me at all. And I was done whispering to people who only ever listened to themselves one morning. I woke up without that heavy pause, the one where you check your phone before your breath, hoping for something that never comes. I just got up, made coffee, opened the window and let the breeze move through the house. It smelled like early spring, clean, undecorated. Honest, I didn't realize how long I'd been living in emotional clutter until the air started to feel light again. I spent that day planting herbs in small pots by the kitchen window. Basil, rosemary, a little mint. Simple things, but they felt like declarations. I'm still here, I'm still growing. Not of him. Not of any family, actually. I whispered thank you to her, because that version of me had survived all the versions that came after. His name lit up the screen like it used to. I let it go to voicemail, not out. I didn't rehearse what I would say. I didn't rush to explain the silence he had authored long before mine began. I had spent years building a home he never thanked me for. Now, I was finally building one for myself with nothing borrowed, nothing broken, only space for what chooses me back. A few weeks later, I found myself at the county office downtown. The building smelled like paper and quiet decisions. I hadn't told anyone I was coming, not even Marta. I wore a simple sweater and carried a folder under my arm, filled with documents I had gathered slowly over the past month. The deed to the house, utility bills in my name, bank statements showing every withdrawal I'd made for that wedding. I had highlighted each one, not out of spite, but out of clarity. I wasn't going to make a speech. I was going to make it official. I sat with a clerk who looked bored, tapping on her keyboard with one acrylic nail. "And what would you like to do today?" she asked. I looked her in the eye and said, "Place the house in a trust. Under my name, only mine." She blinked, then nodded. "We can do that." I signed the papers without trembling. The pen didn't shake. My breath didn't catch. It felt like filing away a ghost. Not an act of revenge, but of reclamation. When I walked out of the building, the sky looked no different. The world didn't applaud. No one knew that a woman had just saved herself from being erased again. But I knew, and that was enough. I walked 3 blocks to a cafe I'd never visited before and ordered lunch alone. I sat by the window and watched people pass, unaware that they were walking by someone who had once given everything and now, finally, had something that couldn't be taken. I ate slowly. I paid in cash. I tipped well. And for the first time, in a very long time, I felt like a woman who didn't owe anyone anything, not even an explanation when I got home. I sat at the kitchen table and read the trust papers again, not because I doubted what I'd done, but because I wanted to see my name printed clearly on something no one could rewrite. It felt almost surreal. For years, I had existed in the margins of everyone else's needs. I had paid bills with apologies, offered time like currency, and accepted silence as the cost of being the good one. But this was mine, fully legally. Emotionally, mine. I folded the papers carefully and placed them in a new folderette. Thick, firm, then locked it inside the drawer beneath my bed. It wasn't about hiding. It was about keeping what's sacred away from hands that hadn't earned the right to hold it. That night, I made a simple dinner. Rice, beans, sautéed greens. I poured a glass of wine and lit a candle, not for show, not for guests, but for myself. I ate slowly. I let the stillness linger. And as I sat in that warm, quiet space, I realized something. I didn't miss him the way I used to. I missed the version of him I had built in my mind, the one who would have said thank you, who would have seen me, who would have kept my name close when the spotlight came. But that version didn't exist. I had loved a shadow. And now, with every breath, I was stepping back into the light. I didn't hate him. I didn't wish him harm. I just no longer wished to be the invisible scaffolding to someone else's life. That trust document wasn't just paperwork. It was the final page of a chapter where I had waited to be chosen. And the first page of one where I finally chose myself. The next morning, I found a letter in the mailbox. No return address, but the handwriting was familiar, his, a little rushed. Like always, I opened it slowly, fingers steady. Inside, just a few lines. He said they were settling in, that the wedding had been a blur, that he hoped I wasn't upset about anything. I know you helped a lot. Sorry if I didn't say that clearly. That was the line, if I didn't say that clearly. As if gratitude could be implied. As if being erased in a room full of people could be undone with 5 vague sentences scribbled in pen. I folded the letter once, then again, and placed it in the drawer, not with the trust documents, but with the old receipts, a relic of a pattern I no longer participated in. I didn't reply, not because I wanted to hurt him, but because I finally understood that silence doesn't always mean waiting. Sometimes it means peace. That afternoon, I sat on the porch with a book and watched the light shift across the yard. A bird landed on the railing. Just for a moment, I didn't move. I just watched it, completely still. The moment felt fuller than entire conversations I'd had in the last year. It's strange how life expands when you stop trying to fit inside someone else's version of it. He would go on living. He would likely never understand the cost of what I gave. And that was okay now. Not easy, not painless, but okay. Because I wasn't standing at the edge of his life anymore, knocking to be let in. I was finally inside my own, and for the first time in years, that door didn't feel like it needed to be open for anyone but me. He showed up unannounced 3 weeks later. I was watering the herbs by the window when I saw his car pull into the driveway, one I hadn't seen since the wedding. My heart didn't race, my hands didn't shake. I simply turned off the faucet, dried my palms on a towel, and waited. He knocked gently, like someone unsure if they were welcome. I opened the door and found him standing there with a paper bag and tired eyes. I brought lunch, he said. Thought maybe we could talk. I stepped aside without smiling, without frowning, just neutral, present. He walked in like a guest, eyes scanning the room, maybe noticing the small changes, the absence of photos, the new curtain, the scent of rosemary in the air. We sat at the kitchen table, and for a moment neither of us spoke. He unpacked sandwiches, 2 bottles of water, placed them carefully on napkins as if performing an old ritual. I know I should have called, he said. The wedding. It was hectic. I didn't mean to forget you. I watched him quietly. People don't forget what they truly hold close. They forget what they've learned to live without. He kept talking about how they'd moved into a new apartment, how work was stressful, how he hadn't meant anything by that speech. And the more he spoke, the more I realized this visit wasn't for me. It was for him, to feel better, to clear a conscience without having to carry its weight. I nodded gently, let him speak. But I said little, because I knew something he didn't. I didn't need to be invited back into a place I had already walked away from, and that kind of freedom. It doesn't need an apology, it only needs a door that stays closed. He noticed it eventually. The shift. The way my answers were calm, measured, not cold, but not reaching either. I didn't ask about their apartment. I didn't offer leftovers to take home. I didn't fill the silence for him. He looked around the room like he was searching for something that used to be here, some version of me that still bent, still waited, still lit up just because he walked through the door. But that woman was gone. Not out of anger, out of survival. You've changed, he said finally, almost confused. I smiled just a little. I've come home to myself, I replied. His eyes darted to the bookshelf, to the desk in the corner, to the herbs by the window. You didn't answer my letter, he added. No, I said softly. I didn't need to. He sat back, his shoulders sinking, realizing that what he came for wasn't here. Or maybe it never truly was. He had counted on my forgiveness, my hunger to be included again, but I had learned something in the silence. Inclusion that requires self-erasure is not love, it's performance. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope. Just in case you ever want to transfer the house, we can talk about it. I didn't even look at it. I already did, I said. It's in a trust. My name, only mine. He stared at me for a long time, eyes wide with something between surprise and discomfort. Maybe even respect. Maybe, I don't know. But I didn't need it anymore. I wasn't here to teach him a lesson or wait for understanding. I was simply protecting what I had left myself. And for the first time, he seemed to finally realize. That door doesn't open the way it used to. When he left, I didn't follow him to the door. I stayed seated, hands wrapped around a warm mug, watching the steam curl into the quiet of my living room. He paused at the threshold like he wanted to say more. Maybe something heavy or rehearsed, but the silence between us had already spoken, louder than any words could. I heard the click of the door closing, then the soft sound of his car pulling away. And just like that, the house was mine again. Not just in paperwork or name, but in energy, in breath, in stillness. I stood up slowly, walked to the window, and opened it. The rosemary plants fluttered in the breeze, the sun touched the table, the books, the floor, everything looked untouched and alive. I had thought this moment would feel sad, maybe even final, but it didn't. It felt clean, like the end of a sentence that didn't need punctuation, just a full stop. I didn't cry, I didn't replay the conversation in my head. I just made lunch, played my music, sat in the armchair by the bookshelf, and returned to the book I'd been reading, one chapter at a time, like my life. And somewhere between the pages, I smiled. Not because he came, but because he left, and I didn't crumble. I had built a version of myself that didn't require acknowledgement to feel real. A woman who could hold her own name without needing it spoken by someone else. A mother, yes, but also more than that. And if he ever returns again, I won't be waiting at the door. I'll be here living in full color, surrounded by peace, with nothing missing. Because I gave him everything once, and now I've finally given something back to myself.